Now that we completed the cones, we're gonna start doing the cusp ridges first. Then we're gonna go around and we're going to do the marginal ridges. Following the marginal ridges, we're going to do the inside or buckle. Following the marginal ridges, we will do the outside contours, which is the buckle, the inside contours, the lingual, and after we finish that, then the marginal ridges. After we finish that, then we'll have the triangular ridges. Following that, we're gonna puddle it in and do the secondaries. Alright, so let's continue with the maxillary cusp ridges. As usual, I start with the first premolars, but you could start with whatever tooth you would like to and whatever surface you'd like to. I'm gonna make my contact area here. Gonna touch that tooth and try to get that point angle going here and start making it look like the tooth that it's supposed to be. As you notice, I'm trying to continue this contour that we have on the lower or gingival half of the tooth. So I'm just going to grow this cusp ridge all the way to the cusp tip. As I said before, you can stop this video anytime you want to catch up. Okay, so this is the maxillary. So the cusp is going to be on the outside or on the buccal surface of the mandibular teeth. So if you look at it from the front, we're going to have an overbite and we're going to have an overjet as well. Continue with the second molar, premolar. So I like to do the buccal cusps first, all of them. That will give me an idea of where we're going with the tooth. Again, if you hear me blowing, that means I'm cooling the wax to make sure it doesn't flow downwards and ruin the shape. Again, here we're going to add a little bit of wax to match up the point angles. If you notice, on this particular model, the teeth have been cut down quite a bit, maybe more than what we should have cut down. So it's not a real issue, it's just that it's going to slow us down a little bit because we have to add more wax to it to complete the tooth. But the idea is the same thing. We have to follow the curve of Spee. So we kind of take a look at the cusps on the third molars and the cusp on the canine, and I kind of draw an imaginary curved line all the way down to the second cusp of the third molar. Move to the mesiobuccal cusp of the first molar here, and carefully we're going to add just enough wax to contact the adjacent tooth. Then we build up the point angle going up to the cusp tip, and then down the distal slope of the mesiobuccal cusp. Let's cool it down a little bit. Then we'll move on to the mesial slope of the distal buccal cusp. Down to the distal slope of the mesiobuccal cusp. And we're starting to get our shapes in order. We'll move on to the second molar. match up the point angles a little bit. Here's the distal slope. The distal slope of the second molar. Let's bring up the point angle to match the third. Let's bring this cusp tip a little bit more distal, just to even out the lobes. Alright, so here's our cusp ridges for the buccal side. And this is the cusp to marginal ridge side. As we can see, the cusps are still a bit short, so we're gonna have to increase the cusp size quite a bit, since we do need the overbite. We have an overjet, we just don't have an overbite yet. So now we're getting closer. If we notice our unprepared arch, the cusps are not so extreme like they look here, so we're going to have to do something about that at some point. So what we're going to do is increase the height where the point angles are to increase the length of the tooth, because we cannot have our cusp ridges this steep, so the point angles also need to come up here. So we'll raise the point angles. And make our central groove where the lobes come together also higher, so less extreme. a little bit more shallow. Then increase the cusp height on the second molar. And increase the height where the point angle is, in effect making our cusp ridge a little bit more shallow, so it doesn't go at such a high angle. Okay, so let's close the opposing and see how that looks. It's a little bit better. As you can see, if we're gonna go into a lateral excursion, we still need to miss those teeth. We still have some room there so that the cusp will still miss those areas. If you notice, it is going through this area, which is what we're looking for. There are also wear facets on these teeth, showing us that the cusps probably passed through here, and the tooth itself may have been in group function. Group function is what? It's when all the teeth touch in lateral excursion. All the balancing teeth touch. They all function as a group together. This one here looks like it did touch because it broke off. So that means this particular cusp was a little bit too high. So we're going to shorten this cusp a little bit. We'll double check our excursion. You see how the tooth is like almost touching. We cannot make it any taller than that. And this tooth is going straight through the groove, which is what we're looking for. So let's fine tune this cusp tip a little bit. Now when the cusps are this high, or when the wax ups are this high, that means we're going to have a very deep fish mouth. And that fish mouth on the inside of the teeth, we want to make it a little bit more shallow, so we'll probably end up adding some wax on the bottom there. On yours, I don't know how your models are, but I think yours are a lot more shallow and you won't need to do as much as I do on this model. So all these little things you have to take into consideration when you're doing this exercise. Okay, so there is our buccal cusp ridges. And as you notice, we have a little bit of space here for the blue wax on the buccal for our buccal contours later on in the exercise. So let's start on the lingual cusp ridges. And the mesial marginal ridge here, the distal marginal ridge there, we can kind of fill all this in. And as we're going, we can do the marginal ridges on each tooth one by one. I will start probably here on the mesial marginal ridge of the first premolar, continuing on to all the cusp ridges on the linguals, and we can also go into the marginal ridges on each of the teeth as we are progressing through each tooth. So now that we are on the lingual, these cusps will come into contact. So as we're moving on through every tooth, we can add some wax and then close the articulator and make sure we have contact where we needed to have contact before we move on to the next tooth. Okay, there's our first contact. Albeit it's kind of hard, so I just lighten it up a bit. And that is the mesial marginal ridge of the first premolar being contacted by the buccal cusp tip of the mandibular first premolar. So now we move on to our cusp tip. And what you can do is you can kind of take a look at the inside here and see where that cusp tip wants to go. See right there. Let me lighten up this a little bit. So that looks like it wants to go right, and the embrasure of the first and the second premolar. And we got quite a bit to go, so we got about a good 1.5 millimeters or so of contact, just like all the other cones. So let's continue with that. So we gotta remember the curve of Wilson. So that tells us that the linguals of these premolars need to be as long or longer than the buccal cusps. So we're going to just keep building this cusp tip up because we know that it's got to go high. Okay. If we take a look at the solid model here, we'll notice that the cusp tips here are almost at the edge of the tooth structure itself. So that's how we have to design our wax subs too. This cusp tip can't be too far to the buccal, so we gotta put this cusp tip a little bit more to the lingual. So let's build it up more towards the lingual, and then later on we can make some room in the middle for our triangular ridges. So now we're gonna go down the slope. There's the distal slope of the lingual cusp. Kind of drip the wax down all the way to the bottom. Make sure you seal it, and then build it upwards. Make sure you keep checking your contacts. Okay, we don't have a contact just yet. So if you notice, the height of the lingual is starting to be a little bit longer. Can still adjust it a little bit later if we need to. Just gonna go in here, make a tiny bit more room, and then close it down, make sure everything is okay. So now we have a contact right on the tip here, and the next contact is going to have to be right on the marginal ridge on the mesial of the maxillary second premolar, and or the distal of the first premolar on the maxillary. It looks like here we're more going to be on the marginal ridge of the second premolar rather than the first, but it's okay if it touches both. So we'll add a little bit because I can see we're pretty close. This is more like a ridge that starts at the cusp tip here, and then it goes down to the marginal ridge. And we have a contact right on the marginal ridge of the first premolar right here. Okay, we'll make it a little bit neater here. Can probably add a little bit more wax down inside to make everything stronger, just in case it contacts a little too hard and it might decide to break on us. But if we have a little bit of extra wax down in here, it'll give us a little bit extra support. Okay, so that's our first premolar. Now we're gonna go through all of them. And basically the same rule applies to all of them. The molar on both the cusp to fossa and cusp to marginal ridge setup, they both contact in the central fossa of the mandibular first molar. I'll remind you when we get there. But here we need the contact on the cusp tip. And we need a contact on the mesial and or distal of the marginal ridges. We just keep building here because we know that our first contact was right here on the cusp tip. So we try to get as close as possible to the height of that cusp tip and kind of line it up mesiobuccal, this buccolingually. Okay, so we have the mesial cusp ridge here. Cool it a little bit. Then let's see if we have any contact yet. Nothing just yet, but we will. Okay. You want to make sure you let it cool enough, otherwise the mandibular will pick up that little piece of wax. Okay, so now we have contact right on the cusp tip there. We can start building the marginal ridge on this tooth now. If we kind of join it together like this, we have to make sure later on that we're going to divide it, because each tooth has to have their own marginal ridge. So we'll go down to the distal cusp ridge of this tooth as we did the other tooth. We start at the bottom, make sure the wax sticks really well, and then we start building it up. Let's see. Make sure you check the Kind of hard to see, but it's almost there. But we do have the contact here, and we do have a contact right by the mesial marginal ridge, because we picked it up on the mesial, the distal of the first premolar, right there. So we know that we have contact here. I'm just going to add a tiny bit of wax down here as well. We have a little bit of a void there, so we're going to fill it in. Okay, so we're gonna continue around and see what kind of contact we can pick up on that distal marginal ridge. You see how I'm building it higher? Don't leave the marginal ridge all the way at the bottom, because you will never pick up contact. Let's see. Okay, so now we brought this up quite a bit, and we can see that we have a contact right in this area, and we'll move on to the molar. We build up the mesial cusp ridge. And we'll try to match this cusp to the lingual cusp of the second premolar. Once we go high enough, I'm going to try to see if we have any contact. Okay, not yet. We'll probably end up being able to pick up another contact on this marginal ridge as well, because our mandibular cusps kind of aim right for the embrasure, so it's going to be more like a cusp to embrasure occlusion, just pretty much the same as cusp to marginal ridge. Okay, there's our contact right here. Let's take off a little bit. You can pretty much divide the two teeth here. Let's finish up the mesiolingual cusp ridge, which is also going to be our oblique ridge. And now what do we know about the oblique ridge? It runs in an angle, which essentially why it's called an oblique ridge, because it runs obliquely on this tooth, which means it's like kind of goes up here in like almost 45-degree angle, and it finishes right about where the central groove begins. And here we should have a contact right on the oblique ridge as well. We just have to make it a little bit higher. Okay. So on this tooth we're going to have a contact here on the mesial cusp ridge. We're going to have a contact here at the marginal ridge on the mesial of the molar, and then the other contact should be right on the oblique ridge, or the distal cusp ridge of the mesiolingual cusp. We may not have an exact contact on the cusp tip, because most of the time the cusp tips they don't really go into the pit, and they don't go that high. Because of its rounded shape, the contact will end up being at the mesial cusp ridge and the distal cusp ridge. So if you notice, the oblique ridge kind of looks like a curve, looks like a smile. So think of it that way when you're putting it on. Now sometimes this ridge runs through the distal developmental groove right here. Sometimes it runs through the distal developmental groove right here on the mandibular. And in those cases, the contact may either be on the mesial portion of the oblique ridge or the distal portion, not in the middle. And if you're just building a very thin ridge in the middle, you may pick up contact, but you'll pick up contact like way too high, so the cusp ridge will look a little bit too weird. So you may want to thicken it up a little bit to give you a better chance of getting contact earlier on the ridge before you make it too far occlusal. Okay, so we picked it up a little bit more on the distal side, like right here. So we could probably end up moving this ridge a little bit more distal so we can pick up that contact in a more solid way. And also it will give us more room to put our triangular ridge in the middle, because we don't need this portion of it, since we know that it's going to contact more on the distal portion. Okay, I broke that off, so let's put that back. Just wait a little bit longer for the wax to solidify, otherwise it may break just like what happened now. But it's okay, because we want to put this ridge a little bit more towards the distal. So let's build this back up again. Let's see if we can pick up that contact again. Okay, there it is. So our contact is just about there. So now we move on to the distolingual cusp. We'll build that up. Once we build up the distolingual cusp, that, if we're careful enough, it will give us the distolingual groove, or another name for it is the oblique groove. And why? Because it runs obliquely, or not straight mesial, or not straight buccolingually. Runs at an angle of about maybe 45 degrees or so. Now on this distolingual cusp, you may or may not pick up a contact. If you don't pick up a contact, it's okay. It's a vestigial cusp, it's not really in use. So contact on that is not that important. If you can, it's good. If you can't, it's not a big deal. Okay, I think I picked up a small contact right on the cusp tip there. If you take a look at it, it goes right into the distal marginal ridge of the first molar, right there. Let's see here if you can see it. See? Hammers right into it. Goes right down to there. Okay. So now we're gonna go and finish our distal marginal ridge, which runs a little bit mesially since this is first molar or maxillary molar. They all have a slight rhomboidal shape, and of course depends on the patient himself. Try to stay within the confines of the tooth. See how it runs a little bit mesially here? Same thing with this one, just slightly. We're going to build up our marginal ridge and see where we get contact there. So that distal marginal ridge most likely will contact the mesial point angle of that second molar on the mandibular. You see it right there? We just have to make sure that we also raise this point angle here. Yeah, right there. This point angle needs to be raised up a little so that we can also raise the marginal ridge slightly. And this should go faster if I wasn't explaining things, or I just want to explain why we are doing what we're doing and the techniques used to control where we're going to put our ridges and grooves. Okay, we're almost there. You see how the second molar now is looking shorter? And that's because we need to bring this up even more. Now the mandibular teeth on this particular model, they're not exactly 100% even with each other, so we have to kind of accommodate for these things. Alright, I think we have contact. It's very slight, but that's all we need. Right in this area here, on the distal portion of the distal marginal ridge of the first molar. Okay. So now we're going to do the same thing like we did in the other teeth. We're going to kind of strengthen these areas. So we're going to puddle in and add a little bit of wax on the very bottom of these fish mouths. Now this is the first molar, so we're going to add And these fish mouths look a little narrow, so we may need to add a little bit more wax on the lingual and kind of widen it a little bit. That may also allow us to add a little bit of a contact right on the lingual portion of the oblique ridge. And I was right. Got quite a bit of a contact right here, you see, right in the distal portion. So that means we can bring that a little bit more distally. So we're going to add a little more wax here. This will be our lingual contour in this area. With the blue wax we're going to add further to the lingual. But for now here, I'm gonna take a little bit, oops, let's try to get that back on there. See what I mean about letting it cool down enough. If we don't let it cool down enough, it's going to break. We lost our contact right here now, so we gotta add a little bit more. Okay, we're back in business. Okay, we have a contact right here, right here, right here. We have plenty of contacts now. We have our contact on the mesial marginal ridge. We have our contact on the distal cusp, and we have our contact on the distal marginal ridge. Now that we have taken away some wax from here, we have a little more room for our triangular ridges for later. Again, be gentle when you're carving and let the wax cool down so it has more resistance to carving. Smooth out this a little bit more, this oblique groove. Okay. Let's get that ISO up a little bit. So we might get a little bit better lighting. Alright, so now we'll get going on the second molar. Mesio-marginal ridge of the mesiolingual cusp. So now that we did all the contacts on that first molar, it will give us a little bit of an idea of what to do with the second molar. So it should be going a little bit faster for the second molar. Let's see where we are. So our second molar should be able to pick up a contact in the mesio-marginal ridge. So we kind of take a look at the cusp heights and kind of match it. So this curve goes up to down. Right. Build up our marginal ridge. Try to build one that's separate from the first molar. Contact. Oh, we got a really hard contact. So here we gotta make sure we lighten it up a bit so the contact area is not quite so overwhelming. Make sure that we check this. We already have a contact, so this tooth is almost going to look like the marginal ridge on the second molar. Might have to be a little bit lower than the first molar, just because the contact is so hard. That's because on this tooth right here, the contact on the molar here is a little bit lower here, lower on the maxillary, because the mandibular tooth itself doesn't really have much of a point. It just has a high point angle here. So if you can see the point angle, it makes this cusp a little bit taller than this one. So that's why when it stamps into the opposing marginal ridges, one is higher here and then the other one goes down in here, the distal portion. So it gives it kind of a downward slope. So let's get to work on the oblique ridge right here. Okay, so we got a contact right here. So let's just go in here and strengthen our cusps a little bit. Double check and make sure that our lingual areas are good, but I think here we have a little too much space. This is our tooth structure here, so the cusp is right here. So we're gonna need to bring this cusp a little bit more lingual. So that is what we're going to do. Another thing we have to remember is this is a second molar, so our oblique groove is a little bit more distal than the first molar. So we're going to bring this cusp tip a little bit more lingual, and hopefully we can pick up a contact a little easier. And yes, we picked up a contact right here. So now got a contact here. Now what's left is we have a contact here. Let's see if we can pick one up on the oblique ridge here. Yes, quite a contact. So we're going to take a little bit of this down. So we only have a small contact right in this area. And we can open up this mesiolingual area. This will give us a lot more room to build our occlusal anatomy. So now we're gonna get to our distal cusp. If you notice, our cone was a little bit too far mesial, so we just kind of ignored that and built a cusp a little bit more distal that's more in line with our structures on the second molar. So if you notice here, on our distal point angle and our distal marginal ridge, it kind of goes right inside this embrasure space. So if we were to bring all of this into contact, this tooth will end up all the way here. So we don't want to do that. What we'd rather do is we'd rather idealize these areas here, make this marginal ridge in line with the marginal ridge of the third molar, and the same with the distal cusp of our second molar. Make it in line with the mesial cusp of the third molar. So in reality, when we'd have a crown like this, we have so many contacts already that it will stabilize the tooth. So the fact that we don't have a contact in this area does not make any difference whatsoever in real life. For the exercise as well, I would rather see the flow of the anatomical structures than having to make something in contact that is not necessary, and it would make the project look less than ideal. So here we could improve this by puddling it in a little bit so that we don't have such deep areas. And we can add a little bit more on the lingual. Doesn't matter if you cover your cones a little bit. Just leave enough space for the blue wax. This also will strengthen our structure of this wax. Okay, and now we can maybe improve the embrasure space on these teeth here and kind of divide this into two marginal ridges. And let's make our embrasures. Double check our let's zero out the incisal pin. And let's see if we can go into proximal. Okay. So if we notice, we have no interferences on the working side. Okay. Now we're going to check for interferences on the buccal side. If you notice, there is no collisions between cusps. There's always a slight opening. So yeah, so there we are. That's our cusp ridges and our marginal ridges completed. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to do the other side, the contralateral side, the same way. We're going to maybe improve on our fish mouths a little bit. Just make sure you don't take away your contact points. And next, the contralateral side, and after that we're going to do the buccal and the lingual contours.